Previous videos, what we've been building out is a utility in Java to create instances of volunteers and store them in a MySQL database. We've also been looking at how we can do things like changing changing the images and whatnot that are associated with each user. So we had the ability to go in and change images. But now what we want to do is we actually have quite a few users in our database, but we can't see them unless we go into MySQL, right? So if I go into MySQL Workbench here and I run the select star from volunteers, I can see all my volunteer information, but I can't get it through my my Java utility. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start creating like an administrator view that would allow me to see things like volunteer ID, first name, last names, phone numbers, and birthdays. So to do that, we're going to go back into NetBeans here, and under our views section, we're going to create a new view. So empty fxml, and this one we'll call it volunteer table view. We use a Java controller, and we'll use a cascading style sheet, but we'll use an existing one. Although we haven't really put anything into this yet, we'll just connect them all up so that at some point later, if we want to style this globally, we can. I'll hit finish. So let's go in. We'll start with our view. Oops. And our previous view, let's keep them all the same size. How big was it? I think it was 800 by 600 we did. Pane. Layout, yeah, 800 by 600. So let's do the same here. $800 by 600. And what we want to do is we want to use something called a TableView object. So I'm going to keep a similar structure to our other one, where we start off, we had a VBox, and we fit that to the parent, and then we could add in a label. In here, we could say, you know, list of volunteers. And we can center everything. And then we can add in what's called a TableView object. So see, we have this TableView object. I'll drag it into my VBox. And by default, it'll go the entire width. And if we look at this, it could be our volunteer ID number. And this could be their first name. We can copy, paste into, that's the last name, and that could be their phone number, and that could be their birthday. Phone. And we can adjust these. So if I click in the middle, I can adjust the sizes of these. Let's pull this one over. And maybe we'll make first name and last name the same size. So I can just go to layout, and I can say the preferred width is maybe 225 pixels. It's a bit big, maybe 200. Yeah, something like that. Looks nice. And like before, we can do certain padding. So we can do 20 pixels on all sides and between items. And we'll hit save. Okay, so now we have table view, and each of these items that I'm clicking on, these are called table columns. So we need to set both of these up inside of our controller class so that we can interact with them. So let's now go back to NetBeans, and let's look at our table view controller. So in here right now, we just have, like other classes, we just have the one method called initialize. So let's create some instance variables here. The volunteer table. Add our imports. And then what we have to do is we have to specify each of the table columns as well. So we're going to say fxml private table column. And then what's interesting here is, actually, sorry, I should have also done it for TableView, is we need to tell it what type of data will be in it. So in this case, we're going to go to our models.volunteer class. Okay, and bring in our imports. Again, always make sure you're using the javafx.scene items. So for each of these columns, I need to specify, so this one's going to hold integers, these ones are going to hold strings, and this last one here, birthday, it's going to need to shrink that. Birthday, preferred with 100. It's going to hold date objects, local date objects. So as we create these columns, we actually have to specify that. And they always need to have class names. So that's why I can't use int here. I have to use the wrapper class called integer. So this would be first name column. Own. And lastly here, this last one is going to be a local data object. And it's going to be the birthday column. So let's hit save. Now we can go connect these up in our view. So we go back to our view here, and I click on table view, go down to code. And here I can say the FX ID is the volunteer table. And then I can click on the first one here, and that's going to be the volunteer ID column. First name column. Last name, phone, and birthday. There's not much value in putting an image in the table. It does not display well. They'd have to be really, really small images. So now our view is connected to our controller. And what we need to do is inside of our controller, we need to set up what's called factories. The factories tell the the table where it can actually get information from. So let's do that. So let's look at our first name column as an example. First name column, what we're going to do is we're going to set the cell value factory, and then we're going to create a new property value factory of type volunteer. and it's going to look for a string. And what it does here is now we actually specify where, like which instance variables we need to go to get that. And in this case, it's going to be the instance variable called first name. At our imports. Okay, so if we go back to our volunteer, we're configuring it to tell it to look for first name, last name, phone number, birthday. Okay. Now what we don't have yet is this idea of the volunteer number. We need to also configure that in our volunteer list. Spell these names incorrectly, it actually won't find them. So I have to make sure the names, so it's called phone number. Okay, so this is everything that our our volunteer class currently has, but we need to also add in this idea of an ID number. So if we go back into our model class for volunteer, right now we don't have any ability to store a volunteer ID. Int, and we'll call it the volunteer ID. Now, normally we wouldn't be able to get the volunteer ID unless it came from the database. So what we can do is we can create some get and set methods for it. And we're also going to need to create another constructor similar to this one, but it's going to allow for, actually, we don't even need it. Let's just create get and set methods. So I'm gonna go down here, right click, insert code, getters and setters. And basically with volunteer ID, let's just make sure it's a positive number. So we'll say if volunteer ID is greater than or equal to 0, set it. Good, so do a little validation in our model class. And so now let's go back to our controller here. What do I call it? Volunteer ID column, okay. Now our table's configured. It knows where to find the information, but what it needs to do is it needs to actually go to the database and read the information that's there. So we want it to go over here into our SQL server and read in all this data. So to do that, rather than get my initialize method to be too big, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say try load volunteers. And we're going to create a little method that will access the database, but that means it'll throw SQL injection or sorry, a SQL exception by chance. So we're going to say catch SQL exception E. You know what? Let's just do system. Yeah. Internet ports. Okay. So okay. So first things first, our table view object, what this gets populated with is something called an observable list. An observable list is much like an array list, but designed obviously to interact with these types of utilities. And so the first thing we'll do, we'll create an observable list of volunteers. Okay, so now we have an observable list, but there's no volunteers in it. So this is where we're going to need to connect to the database. We're going to put it all in a try catch block. And if you remember, we covered in class one day this idea of the finally block. And the finally block, even if there's an exception thrown, it will still run the finally block. So what we're going to do here is we're going to close off all of the aspects of this. So we're going to have to close off three things because we're going to create something called a connection. We're going to create a statement. We'll just call it statement. And we're going to create something called a result set. So this is what will get returned from the database. So when we're all done with this method, we need to close off all these items to make sure we're not leaving any openings for problems down the road. So I'm going to take each of these. And in my finally block down here, I'm going to say if a connection does not equal null, then I want to say connection dot close. Similarly, if statement does not equal null, then I want to say statement dot close. And if the result set does not equal null, okay, and now each of these want us to recognize that it could throw a SQL exception as well. So I'm going to say just add the throws clause. That'll put it up here, and then what's going to happen is it's going to force us to catch that in this method, right? So we try to load it, we can catch the SQL exception. Okay, so now here's really where the magic's going to happen. So we establish a connection to our database. We're going to say con our connection equals driver manager, set the connection, and I grabbed the wrong one, but this will still be fine. Java database connector, MySQL. And we'll run, I'm running off the local host. You could put obviously a different address in if you had a remote database server. And the file, the database I'm using is called volunteers. And then the next thing I need to put in is my username and password. So in my case, I chose student and robust password of student. Probably wouldn't really want to do that in real practice, but. So that'll connect us to our database. And then, here. So now that we have a statement object, we can say our result set. So what returns from the database is equal to statement. And you can execute a query, and you can pass in whatever you want. So really what we want is select star from people. Right? From volunteers. And then what this does is it returns a result set. So once we have that list, this return from the database, what we need to do is we need to loop over it, and for each record that gets returned, we need to create a person object. So we're going to say create volunteer objects from each record. So we'll parse over it. We'll say, well, result set. That's next. Sorry. Okay, so while we have that, we can create a new volunteer object. So we're going to say volunteer, new volunteer equals. And here, all we have to do is get the information we want from our result set. So to create a basic person, we need a result set, get, and I'm not going to get the volunteer ID just yet, but we'll get their first name. So we'll say get string. And you can do one of two things here. You can pass in the actual column name or the column ID number. Obviously, the name's probably going to be a little more robust because if you change the column ordering, it's going to screw up your queries. So let's say we'll get the string from first name. And we'll do result set string last name. And we called it phone number. And the last one is it's their birthday. Now here's where it's a little interesting. So we don't say get string. We're going to say get date from birthday. But then we need to convert it to a local date object. So we're going to say dot to local date. Okay. Now that will create a new volunteer. We don't have the volunteer ID associated with them yet, so we'll say new volunteer set volunteer ID, and that'll be the result set integer for the volunteer ID. And the other thing is we need to set the file for their image. So I'm also going to say new volunteer set image file, and here this will be the result set dot get string, and we called it image file. Okay, so at this point, we have a new volunteer object, okay? And we have a list of volunteers. So what we're going to do is we're going to say volunteers, add our new volunteer. So this returns a string, but we need to create a file. So we're going to say new file. So we had that, and then it's probably going to, no, didn't give us any grief. Good. Okay. So once we've looped through all of the records returned in our result set, now we have a list of volunteers, and what we need to do is basically add that to our volunteer table, right? So up at the top, we created this volunteer table. So, and here we're going to say volunteer table, and we are going to get items. So with these things, you always have to get all the existing items. So the volunteer table initially is empty, so it's going to return an empty observable list. And then we're going to add all, and we'll put in our list of volunteers. But the other thing we need to do is we need to be able to test this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our main method here, and I'm going to change. Right now, it points when we launch this to the new user view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be volunteer table view. So it'll load that file instead, that view. Oh, no suitable driver found. Okay, I must have a little error here. So let's go back to our controller where we try to set this up. And I've got extra colon in here. So let's try that again. Oh. Aha, okay. So another little typo or something going on here. Let's take a look here. MySQL. All right, well, we know it works for our new user controller. So let's go here and go to our save user. Oh, where was it? We said insert into database, right? So it's actually in the volunteer. See if we can figure out what's going on here. Okay, let's just copy this. paste it in here. Oh yeah, I think I had some extra colons in here. Okay, so let's save. Try running this again. And there we have it. So here's our list of volunteers. And what's great about this TableView object, you see it automatically puts in the scroll bars for us. It actually has built-in sort capabilities. We can go alphabetical by first name or last name. And you can specify how you want the information to be defined in here in terms of the ordering. So right now, just by default, it's going in order of how they are in the database. So there you have it. We're able to add new volunteers in previous videos, and now we can actually put those volunteers into a table. In future videos, what we're going to do is add in a button here that will allow us to create a new user so we can go to the other scene and then come back to this scene and see all of our list growing. Cheers.